At this tiny district courthouse in rural Chester County, Gary Lee Fellenbaum and his live-in girlfriend Jillian Tate waived their preliminary hearings in the murder case of Tate's 3-year-old son Scott. He died November 4th, the prosecutor says, from systematic torture.
Welcome back, and thanks for being here. I'm Cassie, and this is A Wicked World. The story I have for you today is about a little boy and his older brother who were savagely beaten while other adults just looked on and did nothing to help them. Then one day, it went too far, and one of those boys lost his life. This is the story of Scotty McMillan. Scotty McMillan was born on January 26, 2011, in Chester County, Pennsylvania, to his mother, Jillian Tate, and his father, Lauren McMillan. He was a happy and sweet little boy who loved singing, Thomas the Tank Engine, and his favorite color was green. He also had an older brother named Ryan, whom he adored and looked up to. Scotty's parents split up sometime in 2013, and after that, his father, Lauren, moved out of the state, rarely seeing his sons. The little boy's mother, Jillian, who was known to go out frequently, drinking, partying, and to raves, soon also began looking for a sugar daddy to take care of her. But regardless of this behavior, her family would say that she really seemed to love Scotty and Ryan. Sometime around September of 2014, Jillian, who worked at a nearby Walmart, would meet a man named Gary Fellenbaum, who also worked there. Then, just weeks after meeting, in October of 2014, Jillian would take her 2 sons and move into the home where Gary lived with his estranged wife, Amber Fellenbaum, and their 11-month-old daughter. The 6 of them were now living in a mobile home in West Calm Township, Chester County, about 35 miles northwest of Philadelphia. Shortly after they moved here, one of Jillian's friends would see her working at Walmart, and she would say that it looked like Jillian just no longer cared about herself. That's likely because things in the home had started to get really bad really quick. On the night of November 4th, 2014, Gary's wife, Amber Fellenbaum, would make a phone call to 911, reporting that little Scotty was unresponsive in their home. His lifeless body would be found by paramedics, and subsequently he was rushed to the hospital. Scotty was in such horrible condition that when he was brought to the emergency room, the nurses, who normally saw a lot of awful things, cried. Sadly, the 3-year-old wouldn't end up making it, and he passed away shortly after. He had significant bruising all over his body, and blood was coming from his nose. When authorities went to search the trailer home where Scotty had been living with his mother and brother, they could only find one picture of the boy. They additionally discovered a makeshift cat-o'-nine-tails whip, a bent metal curtain rod, and an aluminum strip, all which had been used in the child's relentless torment. There were additionally holes found in the walls of the trailer home, where it was believed that the little boy's head had been slammed into. Scotty's mother, Jillian, would end up admitting to authorities that both her boyfriend Gary and she had abused little Scotty. She told them how they had laughed as the 3-year-old was hung upside down by his feet and whipped. They also struck him with a frying pan and eventually had beat him to death. Now, this had been going on ever since they had moved into the trailer home with Gary and his wife. But the boy's beatings and the violence towards him had only intensified in the last few days of his life. It was over a 3-day period that Scotty had been beaten to death. He was punched in his face and stomach, hit with a homemade whip, tied to a chair and beaten, lashed with a metal rod, hung upside down and hit, and his head had been smashed through a wall. On the day prior to Scotty's death, he had woken up and been unable to eat his breakfast of cinnamon toast, and he kept spitting it out. This upset Gary, so he and Jillian tried to force the boy to eat it, but he still either wouldn't or likely was just unable to. Gary then became even angrier, and so he began punching Scotty in his face and in his stomach. Both Gary and Jillian then took him to his room, where they continued to punch him. And at some point, Gary picked Scotty up by his back and slammed him into the wall. When the 3-year-old had woken up the next day, he had a very red and swollen face. Again, he was unable to eat breakfast, and Gary thought this was being disrespectful, so he punched him in the face so hard that he fell off his chair. Gary then put Scotty back into his chair and tied him up with electrical tape as he squirmed. Then he began to punch the 3-year-old again, which caused him to vomit and become unresponsive. So Jillian and Gary took Scotty and placed him in the shower in an attempt to revive him. The pair left him there for about 30 minutes before realizing this wasn't working. Therefore, they decided to take Scotty out of the shower and place him on a partially inflated air mattress. After that, the evil couple left the trailer home to go car shopping and then to pick up a pizza for dinner. When they returned, Jillian and Gary said that Scotty was still unresponsive. So the couple decided that it was a good idea to just have sex, and then Jillian decided to take a nap. After waking up around 7:30 p.m., Jillian discovered that her son was still unresponsive, and so she screamed for someone to call 911. According to Jillian, her boyfriend Gary had picked on Scotty more than his older brother, who was 6, because unlike his brother, Scotty still tried to resist. And apparently, like a complete sicko, Gary enjoyed that. Now, Scotty's older brother Ryan, whom the couple had allowed to hit Scotty, also showed signs of abuse and was taken into state care at the time of his brother's death. Gary Fellenbaum was arrested and given 16 separate charges in relation to Scotty's death, including first and third-degree murder, homicide, endangering the welfare of a child, assault, and reckless endangerment. The little boy's mother, Jillian Tate, was given 15 charges, including murder. Both her and Gary were denied bail, and the prosecutor shortly after would announce that they were seeking the death penalty. Gary's estranged wife, Amber, who was also living in the home, was charged with child endangerment, and she was held on a $500,000 bond. Amber would tell investigators that she had first become aware what was happening in the home about 2 weeks prior when she saw Gary spank Scotty. This had come after the little boy didn't respond to him, and he felt disrespected. She also said that she had seen Gary and Jillian beating the boy with a green frying pan days before his death. And she had witnessed Gary taping Scotty to a chair, then pummeling him. But she had done nothing to stop it. The thing is, authorities didn't even believe that drugs or alcohol had fueled the violence against Scotty. Instead, they just believed that it was due to Gary feeling so much disrespect by the 3-year-old. According to Scotty's older brother Ryan's school, Rainbow Elementary, there had been no signs that he was being mistreated. However, at the time of Scotty's death, Ryan hadn't been to school in about 2 weeks. Officials from his school would say that they had gone out to the home where they believed the boys were living, just days before Scotty died. They went to check on things since Ryan hadn't been in school. However, their mother Jillian had never updated their address with the school when they moved in with Gary and Amber, which meant the school only had the family's prior address. So when they went to look for them, nobody had answered the door, and they only left a letter instead. Nothing further had been done. In April of 2017, Scotty's mother, Jillian Tate, would plead guilty to third-degree murder and conspiracy to commit first-degree murder. In exchange for the death penalty being taken off the table, she agreed to testify against her now ex-boyfriend, Gary, during his trial. While she was in court, Jillian would claim that she had no excuse for her crimes, and she accepted responsibility for Scotty's death. However, she also stated that her boyfriend Gary had manipulated her mental issues, kept her sleep deprived, and kept her a virtual prisoner in her own home, or his home. Jillian said, "I wish to God I had my whole life back. If I had never met Gary, then my son Scott would be alive. I am truly repentant. I wish I could take it all back." Which to me doesn't really sound like she's taking accountability, because you still could have met Gary and protected your children once you realized that he was an absolute monster. That's your fault. During her sentence hearing, Jillian's older son, Ryan, had written a letter to his mother which was read aloud. It said, "Dear Mom, in November of 2014, you, Gary, and Amber were trapped in a house of torture. The torture was you guys. The victims were me and Scotty. Scotty got killed. I got beaten. You are the worst mother I've ever known. You just watched us get hurt. I wish you never met Gary. He is really evil. He nearly killed me. You are the reason Scotty got killed. I thought parents were supposed to protect us. Now you are in jail for your time out." As punishment for Jillian Tate's mistreatment of both of her sons, as well as one of their eventual deaths, the mother was sentenced to 42 to 94 years in state prison. And Jillian would never end up having to testify against Gary, because just months later, he pleaded guilty to murdering Scotty, as well as guilty to aggravated assault for beating his brother Ryan. Though at one of his court hearings, Gary would try to claim that he had only ever spanked the boys, and Jillian and Amber were the ones responsible for inflicting the big injuries. Gary would be sentenced to life without the possibility of parole. Then, the last of the three adults, Gary's estranged wife Amber, would have her day in court. She also pleaded guilty, and she was sentenced to 6.5 to 16 years in prison. In addressing the judge, Amber did not attempt to minimize her fault in what had happened to Scotty. She did, however, say that she had been abused by her husband, and that she had taken steps in the months since her arrest to receive counseling, and she had begun turning her life towards the Christian faith. After Scotty died, people who had heard about his older brother Ryan mailed in thousands of dollars to help him reestablish his life, and a trust was opened up for him. However, the boy's adoptive parents, his paternal aunt and her husband, said that over the years they still have not seen a penny of it. The aunt thought that the funds had been intended to help the boy heal during his younger years, but the co-trustees will not give her a penny for anything now and say that it's actually for the boy's college fund. A candlelight vigil was held for little Scotty McMillan shortly after his death, where people gathered in front of the Gateway Church in Parksburg to remember the little boy. Scotty would later be laid to rest in a private and beautiful ceremony on Wednesday, November 12, 2014. He was then buried in a Thomas the Tank Engine casket at Northwood Cemetery in Chester County, Pennsylvania. Well, thank you for listening to Scotty's story today. What was his mother, Jillian, possibly thinking? Not only did she move in with Gary and his wife and child just weeks after meeting him, but she also stayed after he supposedly began mistreating her and clearly mistreating both of her children, whom she said she loved. I think it's pretty obvious that it's because she did not love her children and was more concerned with having a man in her life, which is a story that we hear about all too often. So if you like true crime and you want to hear it from me, then don't forget to hit that subscribe button below and turn on your notifications too, so you'll know when I upload a new video, which is at least 3 times every single week. Thanks for watching A Wicked World today. Until next time, take care guys. Bye. Thank you to all the patrons of A Wicked World. Now, there's even more of A Wicked World on Patreon, so check it out on patreon.com/awickedworld, or use the Patreon app. You'll have access to exclusive videos each month and more. Any support truly helps to make sure the victims are never forgotten, and to highlight the shortcomings of society associated with each case. Do you have a suggestion for a story you'd like to see me cover? If so, send me an email to awickedworldtruecrime@gmail.com.